Okay, so welcome to this week's Torah portion, and this week's portion is called Noach, and it stands for the word Noah. And this week's portion is found in Genesis 6 verse 9 to 11 verse 32. The Haftarah portions are Isaiah 54 verse 1 to 55 verse 5, and definitely not 55 verse 1 to 410. So that's a typo, sorry. The Brit Hadashah, the New Testament portions that correspond with Noah, is Matthew 24, Luke 17, Acts 2, 1 Peter 3, and 2 Peter 2. So we're not going to teach from any other place this week than from Genesis, and you'll see once we start why I got stuck in literally the very first part of this Torah portion. But before we start, I want to speak about something that really stood out for me about this week's portion, and that is that so early on into the creation, we already find death and destruction. And I think there is a profound lesson that each one of us can learn from this, because you see, I'm not sure if you know this, but we are all going to die. No one's going to get out of this alive. And there's a soul death that we're going to die, but also a physical death. So when I speak about this path of death, we're all going to die physically. But in our souls, we will either die through knowledge or we will die through obedience. And you get to choose. And that's the lesson that we learned last week from Adam and Eve, is that the moment that they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, there was death introduced into the world. And from there, each one of us have got a choice how this path of death is going to be for us. We're either going to die through our knowledge, and that always leads to spiritual death eventually as well. Or we have to die to ourselves through our obedience. And that's really where we find ourselves this week with Noah as well, because we see that Noah was called a righteous man. And he was called righteous because he was faithful to the commandments of God. God told him, Noah, build an ark. And he built an ark for 100 years. He kept on building while people were mocking him and his family and saying they're crazy. And he just stayed faithful. In his obedience, he died to his ego. He probably lost a lot of friends and loved ones that thought he really lost the plot. But in his obedience, by dying to himself, he actually was given life. So in our journeys with God, in our walk of righteousness, we've got this choice. We're either going to introduce death into our souls and our spirits through knowledge, or we'll introduce it through obedience. And obedience is definitely the way to die. So I want to talk about a chiasm or a menorah pattern. Now, this is actually a very unique menorah. It's a Hanukkah. It's the one used during Hanukkah, but it's the same principle. Is that a menorah is a chiasm. It's when you've got two opposite ideas that basically reverse, that's mirror images of each other, and you find something in the middle. So this is a definition that I found online. The term chiastic derives from the mid-17th century term chiasmus, which refers to a crosswise arrangement of concepts or words that are repeated in reverse order. So this is a wonderful way of Bible study. Once you know to look for this, there's these chiastic patterns all over the Word of God, and it's always showing you something. These two mirror images, when we find it in stories or concepts or words, it's trying to teach us something. These two things are related, but there's always something in the middle, the pillar that it's pointing us to. So let's have a look. Oh my, let me move this down. Let's have a look. The Great Flood is actually a reversal of the creation. And I'm going to show you how this applies to the chiastic pattern. So I want you to imagine in your mind's eye, on the left side, you've got creation. You've got day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And on the right side, we've got this, this reversal of creation that happens as we see what happened with the flood. And they both point to something in the middle that we're going to get to now. So day 1 we see the Spirit of God hovering over the water. And in Genesis 1 verse 2, we find the scriptural reference for this. And that's right at the beginning. It says, the earth was unformed and void. Darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the water. And then we see in Genesis 1:1, God remembered Noah, every living thing, and all the livestock with him in the ark, so that God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the water began to go down. So just as with creation, where we started off with water and the Spirit of God, that's always represented by wind, we see this wind hovering over the water, and out of that formless and void mass, God created something that had order. We see that after the flood, God remembered Noah, and that he sent this wind, the Ruach, to start blowing over the waters so that the waters started receding. So that's how we see the reversal of creation in the flood on day 1. Then on day 2, we see the division of the water below from the water above. In Genesis 1 verse 7, it says, God made the dome and divided the water under the dome from the water above the dome. That is how it was. And in Genesis 8 verse 2, after this wind started blowing over the waters, we see also the fountains of the deep and the windows of the sky were stopped. The rain from the sky was restrained. So we see again that there's this restraining that takes place with the waters above and the waters below, where God says you can stop raining from above and the springs from the deep can stop gushing forth water. So again, he's gathering the waters under the earth and the waters in the sky. Then on day 3, we see that the water recedes and the dry land appears. And again, this is something we find at the creation in Genesis 1, where it says, God said, let the water under the sky be gathered together into one place and let dry land appear. And that is how it was. And the dove came into him in the evening, and there in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water had cleared from the earth. Can you see this mirroring taking place again? As this dry land started appearing, the dove could pick that little olive leaf and bring it back to show that there is now again separation between the waters and the earth. In day 4, this is the only day that we don't find a mirror image of what happened in the creation story and what happened with the flood of Noah. Because the sun and the moon and the stars were created on day 4, and we find that in Genesis 1 verse 14. But remember that they were also not affected by the flood. It was only the earth that was affected by the flood. And there's even a deeper truth in this, because remember, the sun, the moon, and the stars represent authority. So we see with that flood of Noah, where God destroyed every living thing on earth, the judgment that came through the water, it was on the earth, but God's authority still stands. It stood through the judgment and even afterwards. So this is the one day that we don't find any reversal of the authority structure that God put in place when he created the earth. Day 5, we see in the creation story that birds and fish appear, and that's in Genesis 1 verse 20. God said, let the water swarm with swarms of living creatures and let birds fly above the earth in the open dome of the sky. And that's mirrored in Genesis 8 verse 12, where he sends the dove out and she doesn't return. So we know now that she's found place to settle, and the birds and the fish start repopulating the earth. So we even see this being mirrored in these two accounts. And then day 6, we know that animals and man were created on this day. In Genesis 1 verse 25 to 26, God made each kind of wild beast, each kind of livestock, and every kind of animal that crawls along the ground, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image. And this all happened on the 6th day. Genesis 8 verse 16 to 17, go out from the ark, you, your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing you have with you, birds, livestock, and every animal that creeps on the earth. So we can see here again that being mirrored on day 6. Now, if you're here today, you know that you're here because you are honoring the Shabbat, and that's day 7. And there's even a little picture of the Shabbat for us in the story, because if you think of the creation on the one side being mirrored by how it was reversed with this flood of Noah, and how God actually started everything from scratch again after he brought this judgment with water. There's one central figure that we find in the middle between these two stories, and that central figure is Noah. Now, Noah's name means rest. And you know that Shabbat is the day of rest. So God rested on the Shabbat, and he also commands us to rest on this day. So for the duration of this teaching, I want to focus a little on this man, Noah. So we find in Genesis 6, verse 8, this first verse that says, but Noach. Noach is the Hebrew word or pronunciation for Noah. So forgive me for jumping around between the two pronunciations. But Noah found grace in the sight of Adonai. And this entire teaching that we're going to do today is just going to focus on these two words. We're going to talk about Noah, and we're going to talk about grace. And this is a wonderful way to show you the depth of God's word. Have you ever wondered, why didn't God write? Like if you think of the Encyclopedia of Britannica, there's like volumes upon volumes upon volumes. And when I was a young believer, I used to wonder, why didn't God write something like that, like a volume 1 to 20, with everything in that we might need to live a godly life? But the Hebrew language is like that. It's so amazing. And I often spoke of this before. If you've got limited real estate and you cannot build sideways, you build up. And that's what God did when he wrote the Torah. Specifically, if we look at Torah and Torah study, and that's why we can go year in and year out and do the same cycle and learn new things, because God built up. He built in depth. So layer upon layer upon layer, there are more and more things that we can learn. And I'm going to show you this when we look at just 2 words for the duration of this study and the amazing depth in this. So if we look at the word grace, it's Strong's number H2580. And remember, in Hebrew, we write from right to left. So if you look at the Hebrew word for grace, you will see the nun on the right and then the chet. The chet and then the nun, sorry. Then the transliteration for this is the word chen. And the definition of grace is graciousness, favor, and being favored. So what is important for us to understand, and I think it's a huge misconception that we've been learned in our Greek way of studying the Word of God, is that grace is something that's new. Grace is something that came after Yeshua died. Grace is a New Testament principle. But what you have to understand is that the foundation of the Word of God is the Torah, and that everything that follows after that is a commentary on the Torah. So even everything that you read in the New Testament is commentary on the Torah. That's why there's a lot of misconceptions about the New Testament, because you cannot fully understand the New Testament and a concept like grace without looking back at the foundation, which would be the Torah. So we see that Noah was saved by the grace of God. And isn't that the story of salvation? Isn't that the story of the gospel of the good news? Is that we are saved by the grace of God. God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He has not changed. So the first place we find grace is here in Genesis 6 in the story of Noah. So grace is made of 2 Hebrew letters. It's chet, and that's the letter on the left, the one that looks like a N in English, and nun, the straight one. So Noah, the letters that make up the word Noah is nun and Chet. So we can see grace and Noah is basically a mirror image of each other. It's got the same two words. So you'll see that if you look at grace, the nun stands up. You see the shape is slightly different from the nun that you find in the name for Noah. And that's because it's at the end of the word. So then it's a nun sufit. But let's look at this letter Chet, because we find in the word Noah and in the word for grace, we've got the letter Chet and the letter Nun. So I was curious about these two letters and what are they trying to teach us. So Chet is the 8th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it's also got a numerical value of 8. Chet means life, and 8 is the number of grace. So we can see even just in that one letter that's included in the word for grace is also this symbolic meaning of grace. So the sages believe it also represents ascending and descending light from God. Thus the letter Chet forms a doorway or light from heaven, a doorway of light from heaven. Chet is a doorway to life. The same letter was formed with the blood of the Pesach lamb. So if you look at this letter Chet, can you see that when they had to put the blood on the doorpost of their house, they were painting on with the blood of the lamb this letter Chet. So I'm hoping that you're making all these connections between grace, being saved, the Messiah. Noah is an image of the Messiah. It's a picture of us for the Messiah, where everyone that went with Noah into the ark was saved. It's this letter Chet that represents this mark of the blood of the lamb on the doorposts, and how that kept death outside but kept life inside. Chet also represents new beginnings. Again, it represents life. Circumcision of a baby boy is on the 8th day. There were 8 souls saved during the flood of Noah. The Lord reaffirmed his covenant with Abraham 8 times. David was the 8th son of Jesse. And again, David is a picture of the Messiah. And Sukkot has an 8th day. And that 8th day of Sukkot is in anticipation of the world to come, of the time when we will be restored 100% back to the Garden of Eden, and everything will be restored to how God really wanted it to be before Adam and Eve fell into sin. Now, Chet, and this is what makes Hebrew words so, Hebrew letters so interesting, is that each letter can be broken down into other Hebrew letters. So can you see what I'm saying about the real estate, where just by using Hebrew and studying Hebrew and reading the word in Hebrew, there's so much extra depth that we can delve into. And that's how God managed to fit everything that he wants to teach us into one book called the Bible. So Chet is formed by a Vav, and the numerical value of a Vav is 6. And it's formed by Zayin, and that numerical value is 7. Now, if you add the Vav and the Zayin, you've got the numerical value of 13. And 13 is also the numerical value of the word love, and Echad, 1. And that should immediately be taking you back to the greatest commandment. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. So can you see how all of these things are connecting? And remember, we're speaking about Noah. What is it that made Noah a righteous man and that helped him and his loved ones be saved? It's his faithfulness to God. It's his love of God. It's realizing that God is one. He is the only God. And through that, the fruit that he reaped from this was life. So there you can see on the right a little picture of how a letter Chet is put together. So you can see on the right, first you've got the Vav, and then that little thing that hooks them together is called a yoke. And then on the right is the Zayin. So remember, we said the letter Chet is formed by a Vav and a Zayin. Now the Vav, that number 6, it's the number of man. It represents man. But the following letter, number 7, Zayin, represents the crowned man wielding the sword of the Spirit. And that's the Messiah. So Het then also represents discipleship to Yeshua and taking on his yoke. So with the Het, this letter that means life, that means new beginnings, means you as man take up the yoke of the Messiah and you get connected to him, to this man wielding the sword of the Holy Spirit. So can you see how this, even looking at that and breaking it down, is a picture of us being saved through the Messiah. Now let's look at the letter Nun, because remember the word grace and the word Noah are made up by 2 letters, Het and Nun. So the letter Nun is the 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it's got a numerical value of 50. When at the end of the word, it becomes a Nun Sufit and it changes shape, but it still sounds the same. So there are 5 Hebrew letters, of which Nun is one. When they are at the end of the word, the shape of the letter changes, but the sound remains the same. According to the sages, Nun represents faithfulness and the reward of faithfulness. Oh, sorry for that spelling error. So again, we see that the scripture that says that Noah was faithful and that he found grace in the word of God. He was righteous and he found grace. We see this represented in this letter Nun, where if we are righteous, we will be faithful and there is a reward for faithfulness. And what's interesting is that a Nun also represents seed. And this seed represented by the Nun is specifically also sperm. So not just seed in the sense of the word of a seed that you would plant in the ground, but it's actually the seed that brings forth generation upon generation. And again, we see this letter Nun and it representing seed being linked to the letter Het that has the potential of life, that's life. So in Aramaic, and that is the language of the Talmud, the word Nun means fish, and it's a symbol of activity and life. So we can even see how the Aramaic and how this letter Nun means a fish, how it pulls through to the Hebrew where it represents a seed or a sperm. So the first mention of the word Nun is in Exodus 33 verse 11. We see it says Joshua, the son of Nun. So if we just look at everything that we've learned now about the letter Nun, it might as well have said Joshua, the son of life. And doesn't that sound like our Messiah? So we know as well that there are so many people that lived that we find these stories in the Bible, and in a unique way, each one of us shows us something about our Messiah. They are a picture or an image of the Messiah and what he would do. And Joshua, not just the fact that his name, Joshua and Yeshua, are the same in Hebrew. There's another picture in this for us is that, you know, they could not go into the promised land by the hand of Moses. So it's not the Torah that takes you, that saves you. It's the Torah that teaches you how to be a righteous person. That's what Moses came to teach. But it's only Yeshua that's got the power to save and to bring you into the promised land. It's only the work that he did on the cross that saves. So if we do the same with the letter Nun that we did with the letter Het, and we break it down into the other letters that would form the word Nun, it's a Nun, Vav, and then a Nun Sufit. Remember we said when Nun is at the end of the word, the shape changes. And then this Nun in the beginning is the faithful one who is bent, because remember a Nun is actually, it's got that little tail on that looks like it's bent down. And the righteous one who is upright. At the end of the letter of a word, Nun goes and it stands upright. So what is this trying to teach us? Rashi says that this means the one who is humble before God will stand upright in the final day. And we see this in James 4 verse 10, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord and he shall lift you up. And again, you know, to be obedient to God, to die to yourself, to choose that path of death that comes through obedience, you need to be humble, because only a humble person is willing to die to themselves. So what is in a name? If you look at the name Noah now, will you ever look at it the same way again? Just by knowing what two Hebrew letters spell the name Noah. Noah means rest. His name is spelled with a nun and a chet. And the nun means seed or sperm, and the chet means gate or wall or protected. Remember, even that sign of the door, it kept the death out and it kept life in. So there's a barrier, and it's a barrier of protection. So Noah means the seed being protected, or the seed behind the gate. Isn't the Hebrew language just so amazing? We just did a whole study just based on the word Noah and grace. And what is that one word, Noah? What is it trying to tell us in the word? It says, God protected the seed through Noah behind the gate, and the gate is the Torah. So the rabbis say that invitation where God said to Noah, come you and your family and go into the ark, that invitation is extended to every one of us. We have the choice to come and to be obedient and to come into the ark. And if we do that, it means that spiritually and physically, there's a protection that takes place of the seed behind the gate of Torah. So in Genesis 3 verse 15, why is the seed important? And I will put enmity, open hostility between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall fatally bruise your head, and you shall only bruise his heel. So we see this is a prophecy very early on in creation, just after the fall of Adam and Eve, where God told the serpent that there will be enmity between his seed and the woman's seed. And it's always been about the seed. That's one of the reasons why we had to have the great flood, because you see there was a corrupting of the seed. In Genesis 6 verse 12, it says, God looked on the earth and saw how debased and degenerate it was, for all humanity had corrupted their way on the earth and lost their true direction. And this is just a simple example of GMO foods. You know, when we mess with the DNA of something, we start playing God. God created things a certain way. But that's not even the only thing that was going on in Moses' day. We see that the fallen angels, the sons of God, came down and they corrupted the seed of man. Because you see, the enemy knew about this prophecy, that the seed of the woman would fatally bruise his head. And what did he do? He decided, I'm going to corrupt the DNA of mankind. And he corrupted it by mixing it with the seed of the fallen angels. And that's where the Nephilim came from. And the sages say that that's why Noah was found righteous. That's why he found grace, because on the entire earth, his was the only family whose DNA had not been corrupted by the DNA of the Nephilim. That's why God had to destroy everything, because even the plants, even the animals, everything got corrupted with the DNA of the Nephilim. And so God had to start the whole creation process again, but he started it off with a family that stayed true to Torah, that did not mix their seed. And today we have many different ways of the mixing of seed, and I encourage you to look into it. And like I said, not just physically, where we are messing with the DNA of the food that we eat, but you know, even with animals and DNA splicing, there's a mixing of seed taking place. And then you know, there's just a lot of stuff that you can actually go into, and I encourage you to go and look at it yourself. But there's also a spiritual mixing of seed. And that's something that I really want you to consider and to look into, is where in your life are you allowing the corrupted seed of the enemy, that's a form of religion or a form of doctrine or a form of falsehood, to affect how you live as a believer before your God. So a few questions for self-reflection. What does it mean to be yoked to Messiah? Remember we said that the letters Yod and Zayin, they are yoked, and that's a picture of us being yoked to the Messiah. And ask yourself, are you in the ark of his protection? And remember, the only thing that got Moses into the ark was obedience. So if you are disobedient in areas of your life, are you in the ark of his protection? What path of death are you on? Are you on the path of death of knowledge, where you are just chasing information? Or are you on the path of learning so that you can be obedient? And how are you allowing mixed seed in your life to bring judgment and destruction? So I really hope that this teaching blessed you, and may you have a peaceful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.
Please feel free to leave a comment. If you like this video, click the like button. Remember to subscribe to our channel and don't forget to ring the bell.